Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen that I'm sharing. I'm going to jump through a few different screens today, so hopefully that all goes smoothly. So welcome. I think this is the fourth one in the Zoom series. I'm Fiona McDonald, and if you email or call the EOTC support email or phone number, then it's me that's on the other end of that line. And today we're going to look through the good practice guides that exist. We'll go to the website where they exist and have a brief look through them so you get a general feeling for what's there to support you. And as Catherine said just before, there's not that many people on today, so just sing out at any stage with questions or pop them on the chat. Catherine keeps an eye on the chat as well as we go through. So that should all work. Yep, this is just the general introduction. Questions in the chat, or today, because it's not a big group, just ask them as we go. Hopefully you are all already your school's EOTC coordinator and you're on the database. But if you know, or if you're talking to your neighbouring schools, really encourage them to get on the database if they're not already as well, or anything you go to for your professional development. We're really trying to grow the reach of that database so everyone is getting the most up-to-date information and opportunities to join in with things like this. We have about 950 schools with EOTC coordinators registered, so there's still plenty of room to find some more friends to join. And there it's really simple, as you probably all know, because hopefully you've all done it, 2 minutes. And Catherine will get you sorted out if there's any issues. So what we're looking at today is the good practice guides, and these are for any outdoor organised activity, and they're a growing series. So we've got 12 up at the moment, but each year we're looking at increasing the number that are available. So at the end, I'll ask you for your ideas on what other activities would be useful for schools to have good practice guides written for them. They are a fantastic way for you to double check that what you're doing is meeting the current practice. They're developed by a small group of industry experts, so it's 3 to 4 people facilitated to get all of their knowledge out of their brains and then put into the format that you see today. And then they go out to the relevant organisations. So for example, there's a navigation one, Orienteering New Zealand would have been involved in its development. So we're kind of doing that check of good practice so that you don't have to, but you can look at the document as your way of knowing that the way you're running the activity in the school is how schools should be running the activity. They are written for all sorts of organisations apart from schools. So organisations like Girl Guides and Scouts, Duke of Edinburgh, all of those kind of organisations that run these types of activities. So you'll see things when we look particularly at the planning template that don't quite match what your EOTC school system might look like, but that's because it's written for the broadest possible audience. And as with anything, you know, it should be changed to match your circumstances anyway. So they also help you understand the activity and the level of risk and keep you up to date, as I said. Now they sit on the supported venture website, but they are linked through the EONS website, and I'll show you where they sit on the EONS website, and we're about to zip off into the supported venture website so you can see exactly where you find them. At the moment there's 12 that have been written. You can see the list of activities there. Some of them cover quite a range of activities, so you can see particularly the flat water floating and paddling. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that fits inside that kind of category. Sliding is another example. You can think of all sorts of things that might be sliding activities. And for somewhere the activity doesn't, or the GPG for the particular activity doesn't exist at the moment, there might be one in here that you can look at and think, oh yeah, it's got similarities, it would still be helpful. So I'm just going to swap over to the website now. So this is the homepage of the Support Adventure website. It has a whole bunch of things that sit on here for tourism operators and providers of higher level adventure type activities, as well as the good practice guides. So we're going into good practice, and then you can see here these ASGs, or activity safety guidelines. They're written for higher risk activities, but the ones we're after are these guidelines down here. And these are the good practice guidelines. And first of all, I think if we pop in and have a look at the general guidance. So this is guidance that's written to apply to all activities and is not repeated in these particular activities down here necessarily, and so will be relevant for pretty much any activity you might be doing in EOTC. The format's all the same for all, or pretty much all of the same for all of the GPGs. They have this part that we're going to look at now that is a PDF and has a number of sections to help ask you questions and give you advice on how to run a particular activity, or the general guidance in this case. And then there's a planning template, which we'll look at in a little while, that is completely editable and you can use. So you can see the version and when it was written on the front cover. Always good to check that you're looking at the most recent version. And then there's just some introduction about how they were written and who they were written for. And just a bit of instruction here around how to use the GPGs. So this is the generic one. It goes with all of the activity ones that you might look at. So it's a really good place to start and get a feel for the type of things that might be talked about in a GPG. Talks about the potential value of the activity. So trying to start with the question about why we're doing that particular activity, all of the things we're hoping to achieve. And of course in school setting, that's really about the learning outcomes. These are written really broadly, as I said before, so they're not written in school terms about learning so much. And then they move on to planning considerations, and that's divided down into some categories. So pre-event, what are the things you really need to be thinking about? The risk management component of it, and then post-event. Also a section on working with external providers in here, and I'm not sure who was here last time, if anyone was here for the Zoom we did on external providers, but this really links into what we talked about at that Zoom as well, all of the same things that you'll be doing with your external providers. Talks about your participants and what you might consider around matching your activity to the participants you have. Particular note in here is talking about using and gaining acknowledgement of the risks, so that you're making sure that parents actually have a fair understanding of what you're doing on your EOTC activities. And I think this point here about little videos or photos can be great for both participants and their parents or caregivers to get an idea of what the activity actually is when they're giving permission. Talks about all the things you should be thinking about your participants and considering. Goes on, you know, lots of this clarifying the participant health information, for example, will happen through your school systems naturally, but some of these questions are really good checks for you to think about when you're getting your student health information off your student management system. You know, are you answering all of these questions around health information, or do you need to ask a little bit more depending on what you're doing? And it might look quite different if you're taking kids away overnight somewhere compared to taking them down to the local park. There's all different sorts of considerations about dealing with medications, sleeping issues, all of those things in there. Important note here is if you're working with an external provider, how that information is being passed to the provider, because they need it and they have a legal requirement to have it on hand. So how your two organisations, the school and the provider, are working together to make sure they have really accurate information so they can keep your students safe and make good decisions. The GPGs then go on to talk about supervision, and really the key idea here is there's no one ratio of skilled and experienced leaders to participants. You're always considering a whole bunch of factors and deciding what the most appropriate supervision is. And there's some questions and statements in here to kind of guide you through that process, things that are really good to consider, and kind of strategies for how you might deal with changing supervision structures during your event. Alongside the supervision, of course, thinking about leader competency, and do you have the right staff to safely manage that particular activity with that particular group of students in that environment. And this section guides you through some of those questions. And of course, this really is a key quote down here. It's really the competency of your leaders is absolutely key to ensuring you're running safe events. In most of the GPGs, there'll be a section on relevant qualifications. For a lot of these activities, there might not be an exact qualification, but there'll be aspects of some qualifications. And if you're working with staff that don't hold any qualifications in the particular activity, then it's looking at those qualifications and thinking, do they have those competencies and experience behind them? Or do we need to source someone who does? They then go on to talk about the resources and equipment that you might need and emergency planning. And again, these are sort of couched as questions to kind of guide your thinking through the planning. All the GPGs will then have exemplars, if there's exemplars of good practice, and places to go for more support. So often these might be Mountain Safety Council resources, for example, videos, etc., that can be useful for you and for your students as well. So that's the generic one, this one in here. There's also an overarching risk management guidance document. And this is useful in explaining the process of managing risk. For those of you who have used and are familiar with the EOTC safety management template, which is part of the toolkit of TKI or off the EON's website, that kind of overarching policy and process document that guides your school, this will look really familiar because they are completely consistent in their approach. But it helps guide you through the process of managing risk, all the way through to what you're doing in the field around managing and continually monitoring what's happening. It helps explain the risk management matrix, which is also in the EOTC safety management template, and describes the level of risk, talks a little bit about the hierarchy of control, and has some definitions in there as well. I'm going to do a whole session next time on risk assessment, and so we'll look at the details in this one in the next Zoom. So I thought now it might be useful to pop in and just have a look at one of these GPGs so you can see the more activity related information that sits within them. And here you can see the list. So this is what we'll look at now, the good practice guidelines, and then we'll have a look at the planning template as well. And I've just picked overnight camping. Fantastic photo up in the Craigieburns of Papanui High School underfly tents. So they start by giving a brief description of the scope of the activity that they're talking about. Again, into the potential value of the activity. Always good to ask those questions to start with around why you're doing that activity, where you're doing it, and what outcomes you're after. And then they will always say or remind you to look at the general guidance as well. So here in the participants, you can see they're asking some questions about particular things that are just related to camping in the outdoors. And the same with supervision. So talking about, what does overnight supervision look like for camping and the things that you need to consider. Because they're written for a really wide audience, they won't necessarily tell you exactly what you should be doing for your particular group of students and staff, because there's so many factors to consider in that. That's a decision you have to make for yourself, but they definitely will guide you into asking yourself and your staff the right questions and considering where you might fit in the range of what you need to do. So same with the leader competency. And in this one, you can see there are some qualifications that have an overnight camping component to them. They go through resources and equipment that you might need. Again, some of these things will make sense for the particular activity that you're doing, but they're a good clue to think about. This is an interesting point we've put in here to consider with camping, that particularly when you're camping in huts, that they often don't have smoke alarms. So it can be something, particularly for schools, that you take with you for camping in huts. Talks about leave no trace, and then links to these resources out of Mountain Safety Council that are both good for you as you plan the trip, but also particularly this Get Outdoors series can be really good for using with your kids as an introduction. These are all little short videos on aspects of tramping, camping, using cookers, lots of really good stuff in there. All right. Any questions so far? Can't see the chat anymore. Okay. All right, I'll just switch screens again. Okay, so this is the planning template, and this comes as a Word document, so completely editable. And if people that are using the toolkit, you'll recognise aspects of Form 2 out of the toolkit, which is the risk assessment and supervision structure. So it starts off with this section around what's the value, what you're hoping to achieve, and then you'll recognise this form. However, the good thing about these ones is that we have filled in the control box. Well, we've filled in the harm, hazard, and the control box, and the first likely rating. What this does is give you a really broad starting point, and as you go through, you just basically delete things that don't apply. And there are always things that don't apply because we've written it for the broadest possible circumstances, and some of the things can't happen in the same place. I think there's tsunamis and rockfall, or there's examples where there has to be things taken out of here. So as you go through, you're looking over at this column here, the check column, and putting people against that. So who is actually going to be in charge of ensuring that the vehicles are fit and safe for purpose? If you're not taking vehicles, of course, you just delete it out of there. Once you've been through the whole process of looking at what is relevant for what you're doing and putting people in charge of it, then you go back and you look at the risk rating. So this risk rating here looks at the harm the hazard can cause before any controls are put in place. So before you do any of these things, what is the likelihood and significance of a vehicle accident? Once you put these things into place, these controls into place, then you give it a second rating, this residual risk rating. So what's left after all of these things are in place? And what you're hoping to see, of course, is that the risk, once the controls are in place, is lower. It might be significantly lower, or it might just have moved a little bit lower. And that allows you to see how effective your management, or the management you have planned, should be. So you can see there's a lot of stuff in here for you to start with. Of course, you might get to the end of it and think, oh, there's stuff in here that, or there isn't stuff in here for my particular group of kids or this particular location. And that's where you just add another column at the bottom and add things in. You can see here we've tried to guide it a little bit around organisation and leader. So the organisation, what's really the school's responsibility, and then what's the leader kind of on the day. Might not make so much sense for schools, this bit. So again, you absolutely don't need to leave those headings in there. You're editing it to make sense for you. The next part looks at what are the hazards at that particular place and on that day. So this is where you really look at where you're going, what group of kids you're going with, and what staff you have, and think about what they are and then how you can manage those particular hazards. There's also a little section in here for any past incidents. So that's where you look at things that might have happened in the past at school and take your learnings from those about how you're going to manage them. There's a section here that guides you on looking at your supervision plan that you're going to have in place, considering who's going to be leading, who's assisting, and then really making sure that if there's any particular roles, they're down here and you've talked about the competency of those staff to fill those roles. So this part is really guiding you. And this part exists in Form 2 in the EOTC toolkit. So you'll note that they're exactly the same. And for most schools, they will use this part and the information off here, and then they will go back to this part, and then they will go back into that Form 2 to use the supervision plan that's in there. And the same probably applies for the emergency communication plan, because in the toolkit there's a whole separate document on emergency plans. But this is a good check to make sure that your school system, whether you're using the EOTC forms from the Ministry of Education off the EON site or something else that you've developed over time, it's really good to check these documents against each other and make sure you're identifying any gaps and filling them. You don't have to change all your forms over to something new. You just need to make sure your forms are doing the job of the current practice. That's all your contacts. You'll have this part out of your student management system. Site maps are always good, particularly in camping, to kind of get an idea of what's where. And then they have some expanded lists on what you should be taking with you and considering. And then there's a little bit of post review, but again, in the EOTC forms, you have a whole separate review form that sits in the EOTC forms. So I'll just sit back again. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour through the GPGs, format, etc. Information that's in there. Any questions at this stage? Goodness, we're going to be quick today. So the next ones we've been looking at, so beach activities, so that's things that you might do on the beach or just in the water, that has been written, and it is way with Surf Lifesaving having its final review at the moment. So as soon as that comes back from Surf Lifesaving New Zealand, that will join the other 12 on the website. Transport and is in the early stages of development, and that won't probably look so much like a GPG. It'll look more like one of those overarching guidance documents, I think. And then the next GPG that we've just started thinking about but haven't started writing is around volunteering activities. So pest management activities, planting, weeding, farm visits might well fit in there. Those type of activities where you go out and do something on a farm or in some sort of waterway, or the things involved in trapping or pest management. So the plan is to develop up to about 3 a year, and then these ones that are already developed go into a review cycle as well. So the oldest ones on that website are 3 years old now, so they'll be up for review next year. So every 3 years, or if practice suddenly changed, if something came out of a coroner's report or an incident, then that'd be changed pretty much straight away, or taken down until they could be changed if that was the case. So what I'm interested in here is ideas on what else could go on the list. If you've got anything that you think, oh, we do that at school, I'd love to have one of these good practice guides.
Oh, hi there. My name is Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Jeremy? Yeah, yep.
Oh, hi. Hey, one thing that's just on my mind a little bit. I'm a teacher at Waterways Bay School up in Whangarei Heads area. But just in regards to sort of things that we should be considering with, like such as if COVID-19 or something came back in where there was like a level, currently Waterways we're in level 1, but level 2. I know that EOTC has put out some good guidelines, I think, around COVID level 2. Yep. Is that something that you would consider that would be the best place to refer to? Or is there any good practice guidelines that you guys also add into your activity-based practice guidelines?
When we wrote so there's level 2 guidance for COVID and level 1, it's sort of that overarching thing, so you can apply it to all activities you do, I think. Sure. And on the end of both of those guidances, there's frequently asked questions. So for example, there was at level 2, DOC suddenly had, well not suddenly, but they had quite stringent restrictions on their huts. So we've just put that in there as a frequently asked question rather than rewriting the good practice guide. And that kind of seemed like a much more responsive and easier way to manage it.
Yeah.
And lots of those frequently asked questions came from schools, and I just kind of combined them and made them into frequently asked more general questions. So at any stage, if we end up trucking back down that level and you can't find the answer for your particular activity or question, just jump on the support EOTC or EOTC support email address, and I can either answer you, well I will answer you directly, but I can also create a frequently asked question to add in.
Oh, great. No, thank you for that. And yeah, as I say, I've just sort of stumbled across these good practice guidelines recently, and yeah, really excited about the way they can apply to our current learning context. So yeah, appreciate you guys putting them together. It's really great.
Cool. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Andrew Ferguson from Mount West Grammar. I'm just wondering, would you consider doing one on something like mountain biking? Or road biking?
Oh, road biking might be quite good. We started off by saying we wouldn't do any GPGs for activities that had the activity-specific guidelines, which is the ones that are captured under the adventure regulations.
Yeah.
So back in that support adventure site, there is a ASG for mountain biking because it's captured under the regulations. It's higher level, I think, than what a lot of schools do. So it would definitely be something that I think we could consider. And I'll put it on the list for the conversation.
The suggestion that I've been talking about with a couple of schools is an urban riding, which would be a sort of mixture between mountain biking at a dedicated mountain biking park, or rather compared to urban riding where they might be doing road skills or off-road skills, but not necessarily covering things like jump structures, that sort of things. I was wondering if there was a medium between there that you could look at.
Yeah, there well could be. So would you include any jumping stuff or not?
Not so much jumping, but bike handling. You might say you glorified ride safely to work, to school kit, and covering things like small steps and that sort of thing is one of the ones that I do that in the introduction to mountain biking currently, where we do some what I call urban rides.
Yeah.
Where we do some rather than doing non-stable jumps, we do going down a set of 3 stairs or something like that.
Right. Yep.
As an example, something that kids quite often try and do regardless.
Yeah.
And I just make them wear a helmet as well. But yeah, it was just a thought.
No, that's great. I have a little group of facilitators, and their next meeting is December, to try and pull together the next 3 off the rack, really. So all ideas, it's great to fire those into that group for discussion.
I think with me goes, kia ora, it's Ruth here from Kotaku Reo. Just kind of following on from the beach activities, because that's what I was thinking at the beginning when you said, but also there's currently like the inland waterways swimming and then floating and paddling. I haven't actually looked into that one. But would that cover paddleboarding and kayaking?
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
Perfect. That's kind of, we've found that our students, but also students in the mainstream have been doing a lot of that, so we've been trying to look into make that work.
Yeah, the combination between those two, I think, should cover those things.
Cool.
Actually, river crossing was one that I had a question mark. Does anyone do river crossing in their programs?
Some of the more Duke of Ed ones have done it at higher level, but for us particularly, it's normally with another school.
Yep. Okay. Any other ideas? Libby, have you got any ideas that you want to pop in chat? Libby can hear us but can't talk back. Okay. So if there's no other ideas, at any stage, if anything comes up, just jump on the email and send me your thoughts.
Libby has written to me, just noted yes to river crossing. So supportive of river crossing.
Excellent, thank you. So this is just the EON's homepage on our website, the big EOTC coordinator button when you're telling your friends where they need to register. And then to find a quick link to the good practice guides, this is the EOTC management page off the top bar, and here's the toolkit forms, obviously, that I referred to. This is a safety management plan template in here, and the forms. Here's the good practice guide, so that just links you straight through to that page. And here are the link to the other ones of these Zooms and the rest of the series. So the level 2 Zoom, COVID Zoom, is in that series if we happen to hop back into that space, fingers crossed. I think last time, there's also a level 1 one there, and I think it was the afternoon, just after I'd given the level 1 Zoom chat, that we went back to level 2. So I try not to jinx it again. And so here's that email address anytime, and it can be for anything to do with EOTC. And there's all sorts of ways I can support there. For some schools, we've been having little Zooms where they've got 2 or 3 questions they've got lined up about their systems or a particular event. Other schools, I can just point you in the right direction if you've got a question around a particular activity, or yeah, flick you all sorts of resources. So please use it. It's there for you to use. And that's all I've got, but really happy if anyone's got any other questions. The other thing I'm always after too is what else to put in this series of Zooms that people would be interested in. The next one is on the risk assessment process, and then that should be it for this year, because I think we decided that December really wouldn't work for anyone. But there's a, we're aiming to do at least one a month through next year as well.
So when is the next one, sorry?
Next one will be the 2nd Tuesday of November. And you just register on the EONS page. Back here somewhere. It's, yeah, into this EOTC management Zoom series, and the list as they're developed pops up in there, and you can just register to hop on.
Awesome.
Excellent. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll let you finish off your Tuesday.